Ruby Calloway didn't cry when they tied the rope around her wrists. She'd learned a long time ago that tears only gave people something to laugh at. She stood on that platform in the August heat, broad and still, her worn dress pulling at her shoulders, and she looked out at the crowd the way a woman looks at a storm she can't outrun. Steady, jaw set, waiting for it to pass. She didn't beg, she didn't flinch. She just stood there and let them say their worst. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button and follow Ruby's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Bitterroot, Wyoming Territory, August 1884. The heat that summer had a mean streak to it. It didn't just press down. It leaned in, heavy and personal, like it had something to prove. By mid-morning, the auction yard off the main street smelled of horse sweat, dry wood, and the kind of desperation that didn't have a name, but everybody recognized on sight. There were 6 women on the platform. Ruby Calloway was the last one in line. She stood with her wrists bound in front of her. Loose rope, mostly for show, same as the others. And she kept her eyes on the far end of the yard, where the fence posts mark the edge of town, and the land opened up into nothing but brown grass and pale sky. She'd learned early that if you looked at people when they were deciding what you were worth, you gave them too much. Better to look past them. Better to look at something that couldn't talk back. She was 34 years old. She was heavy, not soft heavy, not the kind of heavy that got described as handsome or well-built. She was fat in a way that made people count her portions at the table and whisper behind her back about the cost of feeding her. Her arms were thick and strong from 22 years of hauling, lifting, wringing, kneading. Her hands were broad, her fingers calloused at the tips. Her black hair was wound up tight and pinned with 2 bone hairpins she'd had since Missouri. Her face was round and brown from the sun, her jaw set hard beneath soft cheeks. She knew what she looked like. She'd been told often enough. The auctioneer was a thin man with a tobacco-stained mustache and a voice like a gate hinge. He worked through the other women fast. A redhead with small hands, 2 sisters from Kansas, a widow who kept her chin down. Each one went in under 2 minutes. Ruby watched from her place at the end of the line and counted the seconds like a woman bracing for a fall. Then it was her turn. "Last one," the auctioneer called out, and his voice dropped just slightly in pitch, the same way a man's voice drops when he's selling a horse with a bad leg. "Sturdy woman, strong hands, knows her way around a kitchen, I'm told. Will open at $1. Silence. A real, flat, deliberate silence. The kind that has weight to it. Someone in the crowd coughed. A horse stomped behind the livery wall. 2 men near the back exchanged a look that said everything without a single word. 80 cents, the auctioneer tried. Nothing. 60. His voice picked up a note of irritation, like the yard itself was embarrassing him. "Come on now, she'll earn her keep before first frost." From somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a man's voice rose. Lazy, amused, the voice of someone who didn't need to try. "What'd she eat? A side of beef a day?" The laughter came fast and loose. Ruby's jaw tightened. She didn't look toward the voice. She looked at the fence posts. 50 cents, the auctioneer said. Quieter now. "I'll take the redhead back," another voice offered. And the laughter came again, rougher this time. And somebody near the front said, loud enough to carry, "Man'd have to knock a wall out to get her through the door." Ruby felt the heat on the back of her neck. Not the sun. Something else. The particular heat of being studied and dismissed simultaneously. She pressed her boots into the platform boards and breathed through her nose and thought about the fence posts and the pale sky beyond them. "Do I hear 40 cents? The auctioneer said. He sounded tired now. I'll bid. The voice came from the left side of the yard, steady, and without any particular effort at volume. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud, because it wasn't asking permission. Ruby didn't turn her head. She heard the shift in the crowd, the scrape of boots, the sudden attention swinging sideways, like weather changing. "You're bidding, sir?" the auctioneer asked, and there was genuine surprise in it. "Said I was. At 40 cents? At 60. Whatever she was when you started." A pause. The auctioneer blinked. 60 cents. Going once. Going. Sold it then, the voice said, flat and final. Not impatient, just done. Sold, the auctioneer repeated. He sounded almost relieved. The gate at the side of the platform swung open, and Ruby stepped down into the yard. She still hadn't looked at the man. She walked toward the gate with her wrists still bound and her eyes forward, and when she reached the edge of the platform steps, she heard his boots on the packed dirt. Not heavy, just steady, and then he was beside her. She looked at him then. He wasn't what she expected. Medium height, maybe 5'10", shoulders broad enough but not remarkable. A faded gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, tan canvas trousers, worn boots. A hat pulled low enough that she couldn't read his eyes at first. His face was weathered in the way of men who work outside. Lines around the mouth, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 or 5 days. A long scar ran from the left side of his jaw down into his collar, pale and healed over, years old. He looked at her the way a man looks at a wall he's trying to decide whether to knock down or work around. Not mean, not pitying, just measuring. He pulled a small folding knife from his front pocket, reached over without ceremony, and cut the rope at her wrists in a single, clean motion. Then he held the loose rope for a moment and looked at it, and set it down on the platform post like it was something that had no business being on a person. "Wagons on the north side," he said. "You need anything from back here first?" Ruby stared at him. "No." He nodded once and turned toward the lane. She followed. Behind them, she heard it. Low, not quite quiet enough. The kind of commentary that's meant to land even if it pretends not to be aimed. "Fat one'll eat him to the bones before Christmas." 60 cents. Man paid 60 cents for that. Could have had the widow from Kansas for $1.10 and had something to look at. Ruby's cheeks went hot. Her stride didn't break. She kept her eyes on the back of the man's hat and put one foot in front of the other on the hard-packed dirt, and told herself the same thing she'd been telling herself since she was 12 years old in a stranger's kitchen. You keep moving. You keep moving, and you don't give them the satisfaction. The man didn't look back at the voices. He didn't slow. He didn't speed up. He just walked with that same, even, measured step. And at the wagon, he reached up and took hold of the rail, and stepped up and waited. Ruby climbed up beside him. The bench seat creaked under the addition of her weight. She felt it. Felt the creak the way she always felt it, like a small announcement she hadn't asked anyone to make. She settled, and put her hands in her lap, and looked straight ahead. The man unwrapped the reins from the post, clicked his tongue at the team, and the wagon rolled forward. They were a quarter-mile out of town before either of them spoke. "You got a name?" he asked. "Ruby." "All right." He kept his eyes on the road. "I'm Caleb Durst. Ranch is about 4 miles north. 2 rooms in the house. One will be yours. I need help in the kitchen and with the house through the fall. You'll be fed right and paid fair. You decide it ain't what you want, I'll take you back to town myself." Ruby studied the side of his face. "You're telling me I can leave?" "I'm telling you the arrangement. Leaving's always an option. I don't hold people." He paused. "I shouldn't have to say that, but I reckon I should." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the road ahead, the grass bleached pale by the summer, the sky wide and hot and white at the horizon. "Why'd you bid on me?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who didn't have an answer, The quiet of a man who was deciding which true thing to say. "Because they were going to drop the price until nobody bid," he said finally. "And then you'd have been in a worse situation than a ranch 6 miles from nowhere. And because you were the only one on that platform who didn't look like you were asking anybody's permission to still be standing." Ruby didn't say anything to that. She looked at her hands in her lap, the broad knuckles, the rough skin at the base of her thumb. "I don't work for gratitude," she said at last. "Good," Caleb said, "because I don't offer it as payment." The wagon rolled on. The ranch house sat low against the land, the way houses do when they've been there long enough to stop trying to rise above it. A barn to the left, solid enough, patched in 2 places on the roof. A chicken yard on the east side, with a fence that needed a post reset. A vegetable garden running along the south wall, half given over to weeds at the far end. Ruby took it in from the wagon seat before she stepped down. "Garden needs work," she said. "It does. Fence post's gone soft on the near corner." Caleb looked where she was looking. "Yep." "Roof on the barn, left side. You patched that yourself?" "Last spring." She considered that. "Held all right?" "Well enough." She stepped down from the wagon without waiting for assistance, and walked to the garden fence and crouched down at the near post, pressing her thumb into the base of it. It gave a little. She stood back up. "I'll need a spade and a new post if you have one," she said. Caleb had come around the wagon and was watching her. His expression hadn't changed much, but something in it had shifted. She couldn't have named it exactly. It was the look of a man recalibrating. "Barn's got posts," he said. "Spade's on the left wall." "I'll start after I see the kitchen." He led her inside. The house was spare. A front room with a table and 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a shelf of books that surprised her. The kitchen had a good iron stove, a dry sink, a window that faced east, flour and salt in crocks on the shelf, bacon grease in a tin, coffee, cornmeal. She opened the flour crock and looked in, looked at the cornmeal, opened the small icebox along the wall, more bare than full, but not empty. A piece of salt pork, 2 eggs, half a head of cabbage. "You been feeding yourself on this?" she asked. "I get by." She turned around and looked at him standing in the kitchen doorway. She almost said something. Almost said, getting by isn't the same as being fed. But she didn't. Not yet. She didn't know this man well enough to decide which truths he could take. "Room?" she asked instead. He led her down the short hall. The room at the end was small. A narrow bed, a folded quilt at the foot, a washstand with a clean basin, an east-facing window. The floorboards were swept. There was a bolt on the inside of the door. She noticed the bolt. "I put that on last week," Caleb said, and his voice was matter-of-fact, no ceremony to it. "Figured it'd help you sleep." Ruby stood in the doorway and looked at the room. The clean floor, the east window, the bolt. She had slept in 4 different houses in 22 years, and not one of them had put a bolt on her door. She didn't say anything. She nodded once, short and tight, and turned back toward the kitchen. "I'll make supper," she said. She made cornbread and fried salt pork with the cabbage cooked down soft in the pan drippings. It wasn't much. She'd worked with less. But she made it right. She timed the bread by the color of the crust and pulled it when it was gold, not brown, and she salted the pork twice and let it go slow on the back of the stove. Caleb came in from unhitching the team and washed his hands at the dry sink and sat down at the table. She set the plate in front of him and took the chair across. He looked at the plate. He didn't comment on the portion size. Didn't look at her plate and then back at his. Didn't do the arithmetic she'd watched men do at a dozen other tables. He just picked up his fork and ate. After the first bite of the cornbread, he was quiet for a moment. "You've been cooking a long time," he said. "Since I was 12. "Where?" "Missouri, then a family in Nebraska, Then another one here in Wyoming, up by Casper, before they lost the ranch. She paused. They sold off what they had. I was part of what they had. Caleb's fork stopped for a moment. He set it down. They sold you. Didn't use that word. Called it placing me. Same thing, with a different hat on. She took a bite of her own cornbread. I've been placed 3 times. This is 4. Caleb was quiet. He picked his fork back up. This isn't placing, he said. You said that in the wagon. I'll say it again if it needs saying. She looked at him across the table. It doesn't need saying twice. I heard you the first time. She paused. I just don't put much weight on what men say until I see what they do. Something moved in his expression. Not offense, not quite. More like recognition. That's fair, he said. They finished supper without another word. She cleared the plates. He went out to check the horses. She washed up at the dry sink and looked out the east window at the darkening yard and thought, one night. You see what one night looks like. She woke before dawn, the way she always did, old habit from years of having to have breakfast ready before the household stirred. The house was quiet and dark, and for one disoriented second, she didn't know which strange bed she'd woken up in. Then she heard the horses in the barn and the creak of the porch boards settling in the night breeze, and she remembered. She pulled on her dress, pinned her hair, and went to the kitchen. There was enough flour left for biscuits. She worked in the dark for the first few minutes, until the sky outside the east window began to lighten from black to deep blue. She didn't light the lamp. She'd made biscuits in the dark before, and she knew the dough by feel. She had the first batch in the stove by the time the sky went gray-pink. Caleb came in from the yard as the smell started to spread through the house. His boots were already on, and his hat was in his hand. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the stove. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know I didn't. He sat down. She put the biscuits on the table with the last of the bacon grease and a cup of coffee she'd already poured. He took a biscuit and bit into it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He chewed and looked out the window at the yard starting to come up in the early light. My wife used to say I didn't appreciate food right, he said finally. Said I ate like a man who didn't notice what was in front of him. Ruby said nothing. She wasn't wrong, he added. But I noticed this. Ruby wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. You don't have to compliment the cooking. I do it whether you do or not. I know. He looked at her. I'm not complimenting it. I'm noting it. There's a difference. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. They ate in the early quiet, and outside the window the yard went from gray to gold as the sun came up behind the house. And for the first time in a long time, Ruby Calloway ate breakfast at a table where nobody watched her plate. 3 days passed like that. She fixed the fence post, reset it herself with a spade and a new post from the barn, packed the base tight with fresh dirt, and tamped it level. She weeded the far end of the garden in the late afternoon when the heat backed off by a degree or two, her broad hands moving through the soil without hurry. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her knees with a brush and a bucket, and noted 2 boards near the stove that had soft spots, and told Caleb so that evening on the porch. I've got planks in the barn, he said. I can do it. He looked at her. Floor repair? I've been maintaining other people's houses since before you were worrying about yours, she said. Not sharp, just factual. He gave a single nod. All right. On the 4th day, he asked her to come to town with him for supplies. She didn't answer right away. You don't have to, he said. I know. She wiped her hands on her apron. Let me get my hat. The ride into Bitterroot was quiet, the way their mornings had become quiet. Not uncomfortable, just wordless, in the way of people who didn't fill silence for the sake of filling it. The road ran through brown grass, and the summer sun pressed flat and white from overhead. And Ruby sat straight on the bench with her hands in her lap and watched the land the way she always did, looking for the things that were about to give. Bitterroot's main street was 2 blocks of storefronts with wooden awnings and hitching posts along the front. It wasn't much of a town, but it was the kind of town that knew its own business and everybody else's. And when Caleb pulled the wagon up outside the general store, the street paused, the way a street does when something unusual has arrived. Ruby felt the eyes. She'd felt eyes before. She stepped down from the wagon with her back straight and her chin level, and she walked into the store behind Caleb without looking at anyone on the street. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of sawdust and dried beans, and the particular sharp scent of new fabric. 2 women stood near the bolts of cloth at the far end of the store. A man at the counter was buying nails. The woman behind the counter, heavy-set, frowning, with gray hair pulled back hard, was Dorothy Haynes. Ruby had never met her, but she recognized the type on sight. The kind of woman who ran a small town by controlling what people could and couldn't buy, and knew it. Dorothy Haynes looked at Caleb, then slid her gaze to Ruby with the practiced speed of a woman who made up her mind about people in 3 seconds and never reconsidered. "Caleb Durst," she said, pleasant enough on the surface. "You're the one from the auction, then." "Need flour, coffee, and whatever you've got for salt pork," Caleb said. He wasn't rude, but he also wasn't offering anything beyond the transaction. Dorothy's gaze stayed on Ruby. "She working out?" "Fine. I imagine she eats well," Dorothy said, and there was a particular tone to it. Light, conversational. The kind of cruelty that wears a smile, so you can't call it out without sounding like the unreasonable one. Caleb said nothing. He set his list on the counter. Ruby stepped up beside him. "I'll need 2 yards of that gray muslin," she said, her voice perfectly even. "And a paper of pins." Dorothy's eyes narrowed slightly. She was used to being looked at when she spoke. Ruby had looked at the muslin instead. "That's 20 cents for the muslin," Dorothy said. "I know the price," Ruby said. She looked at Dorothy then, just once, direct and level. The look of a woman who is done being performed at. 2 yards and the pins." Dorothy cut the fabric in silence. At the back of the store, one of the 2 women near the cloth bolts leaned toward the other and said something low. Ruby caught the word 40 cents and the word waste and the sound of a suppressed laugh. She moved down the aisle and chose her thread. 3 spools, brown and black and cream, and set them on the counter beside the muslin without any change in her expression. Caleb paid. They carried the supplies out to the wagon. On the street, as Caleb was loading the flour sack into the wagon bed, a man came out of the barber shop next door and stopped on the step. He was well dressed by Bitterroot standards. A wool vest, clean boots, a hat with a new brim. Mid-50s, the kind of broad and imposing that comes from never having been told no. Wade Pickett. Ruby didn't know the name yet, but she'd place it within the week. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Ruby. Then he looked at Caleb with the easy smile of a man who considers himself to have the higher ground in any conversation. "Durst," he said. "Saw you at the auction last Thursday." Caleb finished setting the flour in the wagon bed. He turned around. "Pickett? Didn't get a chance to speak with you there." Pickett's gaze moved to Ruby again. Not the fast, dismissive look of the crowd at the auction, but the slower, calculating look of a man adding up numbers. "I had a hand I was thinking of bidding for her. Would have gone to $1.50. You jumped in before I had the chance." "Then you weren't moving fast enough," Caleb said. Pickett's smile didn't move. "She any good? Worth the trouble?" Caleb looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "She's not a conversation I'm having with you." "Didn't mean any offense. I know what you meant." Caleb's voice was still even, the way a man's voice is even when he's made up his mind. and doesn't need volume to make a point. She's not for discussion. Not with you, not with anyone on this street. Pickett's smile cooled. Just making conversation, Durst. Then make it about something else. He climbed back up onto the wagon seat. Ruby was already up, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the road ahead. She hadn't moved during the exchange. She hadn't looked at Pickett once. As Caleb took the reins and the wagon rolled forward, she kept her gaze on the far end of the street. "You know him?" she asked. "Enough," Caleb's jaw was set. "He owns the biggest spread east of the river. Thinks that means he owns everything between it." "He was going to bid on me." "He was going to buy something he thought he could use," Caleb said. "Different thing." Ruby was quiet for a moment. "What you said in there to that woman, what you said to him," she paused. "You didn't have to do either of those." "No," Caleb said. "I didn't have to." He didn't say anything else. He kept his eyes on the road, and the wagon rolled out of Bitterroot and onto the long, straight road north, and the town fell away behind them in the summer heat, and Ruby Calloway sat beside this man she'd known for 4 days and tried to figure out what to do with someone who fought for her without being asked. She hadn't built a category for that yet. She'd get to work on it. That evening, she found him on the porch after supper, a tin cup of coffee in his hand, watching the sky go red and deep orange over the western grass. She brought her own cup and sat down in the other chair without being asked. They sat without speaking for a while. "Why'd you really bid on me?" she asked. Not the same question as before, a different angle on it, now that she'd seen 4 days of who he was. Caleb looked at his coffee. "I told you." "You told me part of it." He was quiet. The sun dropped a degree lower, and the sky went from orange to a bruised purple at the edges. "I had a woman working this ranch before," he said at last. "Years back. She was sick when she came. Didn't say so, and I didn't know how to ask. She died the following January." He paused. "I should have done better by her. I knew she was struggling, and I didn't push hard enough to find out why." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I'm not saying that makes what I did right. I'm saying it's part of why I move when I see something that needs moving." Ruby looked at him. She didn't offer him absolution. That wasn't her job. But she heard it. "I'm not sick," she said. "I know. And I don't need protecting." "I know that too." He looked at her. "I saw the fence post you reset. And the floor. I know what you are." She held his gaze for a moment. "What am I?" Caleb was quiet for a breath. "Someone who's been left to do everything on her own for so long, she's forgotten that doesn't have to be how it goes." He looked back out at the darkening fields. "That's what I saw on that platform. Not helplessness. The opposite of it." Ruby looked down at her coffee cup. The sky kept going dark. After a while, she said, "I'll fix those floorboards tomorrow." "I'll hold the boards while you nail them," Caleb said. She didn't argue with that. The night came in slow and warm around them, and neither of them went inside until the last of the light was gone. The floorboards came up easier than Ruby expected. She had 2 planks loose by mid-morning. Caleb on his knees across from her, holding the board steady while she drove the nails with short, clean strokes. He didn't talk while she worked. He didn't offer advice she hadn't asked for. He just held the wood flat and let her work. And she found, quietly, without letting herself make too much of it, that she didn't mind his presence in the same room. "Other one's worse," she said, nodding at the second soft board near the stove leg. "I see it. You knew about it." "I knew something was wrong with the floor. I didn't think about it much." She looked up at him. "How long have you been living alone out here?" 9 years, give or take." 9 years, and you didn't notice your kitchen floor going soft?" I noticed, he said. I just didn't have anybody to notice it with. Ruby drove the last nail and sat back on her heels. That was the kind of thing Caleb Durst said. Not designed to land, not performing anything. Just the flat, undecorated truth, delivered without ceremony, and left sitting there for you to do with what you wanted. She was starting to understand that about him. She wasn't sure yet whether it made him easier or harder to trust. "Hand me the other plank," she said. He did. They worked through to midday without incident. When they sat down to eat the stew she'd put on that morning, the kitchen floor was solid underfoot, for the first time in what Caleb admitted was probably 2 winters. He ate and didn't comment on the repair, and didn't comment on the stew. And then he pushed his chair back and said, "I'm going to ride the south fence line this afternoon. You want to come?" Ruby looked at him. "Why?" "Because you've got good eyes," he said. "You spotted the post in the garden before I did. And because riding fence alone is slow." She considered that. "I'll need a hat." "There's one on the peg by the back door. He stopped, started again. "It'll fit." She got the hat. It was a woman's hat, plain, brown, the brim a little wider than practical. She put it on without comment and went to get her boots. They were a mile down the south fence line when she asked about it. "Whose hat?" Caleb kept his eyes on the fence posts. "Woman who worked here before." Ruby waited. "She was here about 5 months," he said. "Came from Missouri. Widow. She was sick when she arrived, and she didn't say so, and I didn't push. She died in January." His voice was even, too even, the way a voice gets when a man has said something so many times in his own head that the words have gone smooth. "I found her in the morning. She'd been feverish for 2 days, and I'd been telling myself it was the cold weather." "You feel responsible," Ruby said. "I was responsible. She was on my land, under my care. Responsibility doesn't need a feeling attached to it." He paused. "I kept her things because throwing them away felt like making it smaller than it was." Ruby was quiet for a while, the horses walking slow along the fence line. "What was her name?" she asked. "Nora." She nodded once. She didn't say she was sorry. He didn't want that. She could tell. "Then I'll use the hat," she said, "and I'll use it right." Something in his jaw loosened, almost imperceptibly. They rode another 1/4 mile before she said, "He didn't finish fixing the east section." "No. I can see 3 posts that need resetting from here." He looked where she was looking. "You can see that from here?" "I told you, you learn to see things before they give way." She pulled up her horse at the first loose post and looked at it. "You got wire and pliers on that saddle?" "Left saddlebag." She reached across, unsnapped the bag, and pulled out the pliers without being asked. She was already off her horse and at the post before he'd fully stopped his. He watched her work, her broad hands wrapping the wire, pulling it taut, twisting the end back clean. And he didn't say a word. Not because he was indifferent. Because he was watching the way a man watches something he hasn't seen before and wants to get it right in his memory. "You've done fence work," he said. "I've done everything once." "Who taught you?" "Nobody taught me anything." She moved to the next post. "I watched, I figured. I did it until I got it right." She pressed her thumb into the base of the post, feeling the give. "When you're the help, nobody explains. You just better know." He got down off his horse and came to hold the post while she worked the wire around it. "That ends now," he said quietly. She looked up from the wire. "What does?" "Being the help. Being something somebody runs through and discards. That's not what this is." "You keep saying that because you keep acting like you're waiting for me to show my hand." He met her eyes. I don't have a hand, Ruby. What you see is the whole of it. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back down at the wire. Give me something to stand on besides words, she said. That's all I'm asking. Fair, he said, and he held the post steady until she was done. They were halfway back to the ranch, the afternoon heat bearing down and the horses moving at an easy walk, when they saw the rider coming up the north road. Ruby recognized the horse before she recognized the man. A big gray, well-fed, the kind of horse that costs more than most men make in 6 months. The man on it was Wade Pickett, and he was riding like a man who owned the road he was on. He pulled up easy, hat tilted back, smile in place. "Durst," he said. "Good timing. Saved me the ride all the way in." Caleb said nothing. He stopped his horse and waited with the patience of a man who knew whatever was coming wasn't going to be good and had decided to hear it out before responding. Pickett's eyes moved to Ruby the way they always did. That inventory look, that calculating assessment. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. Ruby said nothing. "I won't take much of your time," Pickett said, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Just came to deliver this direct, man to man." He leaned from his saddle and held it out toward Caleb. Caleb took it, unfolded it, read it. His face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes went cold and still in a way Ruby hadn't seen before. "What is it?" she asked. Caleb folded the paper back up. "Says I owe a debt on the south quarter of this land. Says if it's not settled by the 1st of October, the claim transfers." Ruby looked at Pickett. "Transfers to who?" Pickett spread his hands, all reasonableness and regret. "To the man who holds the note, which would be me," he smiled. "I bought the debt from the bank in Cheyenne 6 weeks ago. Durst here took a loan out against that parcel 4 years back to cover a bad harvest. Never fully settled it." "That debt was reduced," Caleb said, his voice still even. "I have paperwork." "Reduced, but not cleared. There's a difference." Pickett's smile didn't move. "Look, I'm not here to make enemies. I'm just telling you where things stand. You've got," he tilted his head, 53 days. If you can clear the balance, the land's yours clean. If you can't," he shrugged. "Business is business." He touched his hat brim toward Ruby. "Ma'am?" Then he turned the gray horse and rode back down the road the way he'd come, easy and unhurried, like a man who'd just concluded a pleasant piece of correspondence. Ruby looked at Caleb. "How much?" $90. She absorbed that. "What's on the south quarter?" "Best grazing land on the ranch. Runs along the creek." He looked at the paper in his hand. "Without it, the herd can't winter. I'd have to sell down to maybe a third of what I'm running now." His jaw tightened. "That's if I could sell them fast enough at decent price." "Did you know he bought that debt?" "No." "Did you know he was watching the land?" Caleb was quiet, a beat too long. "Caleb, I knew he'd made offers on the south quarter before," he said. 2 years ago. I said no. I thought he'd moved on." He looked up from the paper. "I was wrong." Ruby looked at him and thought about what he'd said that morning on the fence line. What you see is the whole of it. She was starting to think the whole of it was bigger than she'd been told. $90, she said again. In 53 days. "Yeah." "What do you have?" He was quiet for a moment, and she recognized the quiet this time. It wasn't the quiet of a man deciding what true thing to say. It was the quiet of a man who was ashamed of the true thing. "About 30, he said. She turned her horse and started riding back toward the ranch. "Ruby, I'm not going anywhere," she said, without turning around. "I'm thinking. I think better when I'm moving." He fell in beside her, and they rode the rest of the way home without speaking. And when they reached the yard and dismounted and led the horses to the corral, Ruby unbuckled the saddle and lifted it off her horse and set it on the rail and turned to face him. "You've got chickens," she said. "I've been watching. You've got more than you need. You're not selling eggs." "I sell some in town." "You should be selling more. And your garden—" She stopped herself. "My garden now. Squash is coming in. Beans are late, but they'll come. Butter and preserves through the fall, sold right, are cash." She was ticking things through in her head, her voice practical. "What else have you got?" Caleb looked at her. "Why are you—" "Because it's my roof too," she said flatly. "Right now it's the only roof I've got, and I don't have a habit of standing by watching something I could fix fall down." She looked at him hard. "But you don't keep things from me. Not about this place. Not about what's coming. You understand?" "Yes." "If Pickett's got more moves coming, I need to know." "I'll tell you." She studied his face for a moment. He meant it. She could tell when a man was saying words, and when he was making a commitment. 22 years of reading rooms and people, and the distance between what was said and what was done, had given her that much. "All right," she said. "Go tend the horses. I'll start supper, and we'll make a list." He nodded once. "And Caleb?" She had already turned toward the house. She stopped without turning back. $90 isn't nothing, but it's not impossible either." She heard him exhale, a slow, private sound, not meant for her. She went inside. Over supper that evening, they sat with a piece of paper between them and worked it out the way two practical people work out a hard thing, without drama, without false comfort, with the flat arithmetic of what was real. Ruby's handwriting was neat and slanted. She wrote down the egg surplus, the garden yield estimates, 2 lame steers Caleb said he'd been putting off selling, a cord of firewood stacked in the back lot that could go before the summer was fully out. "That gets us maybe another 30, 35, she said. "If everything sells right." "It won't all sell right." "No, but some of it will sell better than you think, because you've been selling alone, and nobody haggles well for themselves." She looked up at him. "I'll go with you." He looked at her. "To sell?" "I ran household accounts for 4 families. I know what things are worth, and I know how to hold a price." She set the pencil down. "You need $40 more in 50 days. That's a problem, not a catastrophe. There's a difference." Caleb stared at the paper for a moment. "You've been here 6 days, he said. "I'm aware. And you're sitting here working out how to save my land." "Our land," she said, and then caught herself, blinked once, and corrected. "Your land. That you need to keep, so this house stays standing." She pushed the paper toward him. "Don't make it sentimental. It's math." But Caleb was looking at her with an expression she didn't know how to categorize yet. Not gratitude exactly. Not admiration. Something quieter and more serious than either. "Ruby," he said. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything." "You've got a look on your face." "What kind of look?" "The kind that comes before something I'm not ready for." She stood and took her plate to the dry sink. "Drink your coffee and let me think." He picked up his coffee cup. She heard him take a sip. "You're going to have to let me say it eventually," he said. "Eventually," she agreed. "Not tonight." The next 2 days moved differently. Not slower, not faster, but with more weight to each hour. The way days move when you know something is coming toward you and you've decided to walk toward it instead of wait. Ruby went through the supply situation the way she went through everything, methodically, without sentiment. She found 2 crocks of preserves in the back of the cellar that Caleb hadn't mentioned. She found a bolt of good wool fabric folded in the chest in the spare room that had value she hadn't expected. She found, under the workbench in the barn, a set of wood-handled tools wrapped in oilcloth that were finer than anything else on the property. She brought the tools to Caleb that afternoon. "These yours?" He looked at them. Something moved in his face. My father's. You don't use them? No. They're worth something. A cabinet maker in town would buy them, or a craftsman. She set them on the bench beside him. I'm not telling you to sell them. I'm telling you they're there. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the tools for a long moment. He left them to me because he thought I'd build something, he said finally. You did. You built this ranch. He meant something he could put his hands on. Furniture, a cradle, something that lasts past the season. His voice was quieter now. He died the year I came back from the war. He never saw this place. I bought the land 6 months after the funeral. Ruby looked at the tools, at him. Then keep them, she said simply. We'll find another $60 somewhere else. He looked up at her. You gave me a way out. I gave you a choice, she said. Those are different things. He picked up the oilcloth and wrapped the tools back up without a word. But when he set them back under the bench, something in the set of his shoulders was looser than it had been when she walked in. She turned to leave the barn. Ruby. She stopped. You said once you don't put weight on what men say until you see what they do. He was still facing the workbench. I know I haven't given you much time, but I need you to know that whatever we work out with this land, whatever happens with Pickett and the note, the arrangement here doesn't change. Your room, your bolt, your place at this table, none of that's conditional on the balance sheet. She stood in the barn doorway. The afternoon sun was behind her, and she couldn't see his face because she hadn't turned around. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because you're working like a woman paying a debt, he said. And I don't want you to think you owe me anything. Her hand rested on the barn door frame. She thought of the rope at her wrists in the auction yard, the creaking bench seat, Dorothy Haynes and her sideways cruelty, Pickett and his folded paper delivered with that smooth, practiced smile. The 4 families before this one, each one a calculation, each one a transaction dressed up in one word or another. I'll finish the inventory on the cellar, she said. Ruby. You want me to hear it, she said. I heard it. She stepped out into the sun. That's enough for right now. It wasn't cold. He knew her well enough already to know that. She was just working something through, the way she worked through everything, quietly, without hurry, by herself. He let her go. That evening, she came back from the cellar with a list. 3 more jars of preserves, a crock of lard, a small tin of good tea she hadn't expected to find. She set the list on the table between them and sat down and picked up her pencil. I've been thinking about Dorothy Haynes, she said. Caleb looked up from his own papers. What about her? She runs the store. She sets prices for half this county. She's also the one who knows what people need before they know they need it. Ruby tapped the pencil on the table. You said supplies come in twice a month. Yeah. You said some of the women in town bake for the harvest social in September. He gave her a careful look. Where are you going with this? Those women buy their flour and their baking supplies from Dorothy Haynes, at her price. Ruby looked at the list. If somebody were selling good preserves and good butter at the edge of town before they went into her store, not in competition, just available, some of them would buy. Caleb was quiet. Dorothy Haynes would not appreciate that. Dorothy Haynes doesn't have to appreciate it. She has to accept it. There's no law against selling your own goods. Ruby met his eyes. She doesn't like me, that's settled. But she can't stop me from doing business. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. A slow, reluctant smile crossed his face. Not broad, just a shift at one corner of his mouth. She'd seen it twice before. She was beginning to understand it meant he was surprised by her. You'd do that, he said. Stand outside the general store and sell preserves. I'd stand anywhere that made the math work, she said. Dignity isn't in the location. It's in the standing. The silence that followed was the kind that settles into a room like something solid. Not empty, Not awkward, but full. Then the sound of hooves in the yard broke it. Late. Too late for a social call. Caleb was up and at the door before Ruby had pushed back her chair. She heard him open it, heard a voice outside, young, out of breath. A boy, by the sound of it. "Mr. Durst, Ma sent me. She said to tell you Wade Pickett was at the bank in town today. She said he was talking to Garrett, Mr. Garrett, the land clerk. She said he looked real pleased about something." Ruby was in the doorway behind Caleb now. "What did he file?" Caleb asked. "Ma didn't know the whole of it. She said he filed some kind of notice. Said something about a prior claim on the creek access. The old Hendricks deed, she thinks. Said if the water access gets disputed, the south quarter's worth a lot less anyway." The boy paused. "She wanted you to know tonight." Caleb thanked him. The boy turned his horse and went back into the dark at a trot. Caleb stood in the doorway for a long moment after the sound of hooves faded. Ruby waited. "He's not just coming for the land," Caleb said finally. His voice was very controlled. "He's coming for the water." "What happens if he gets it?" "If the creek access is disputed..." He stopped. Started again. "The south quarter's worthless for grazing without water. I couldn't sell those steers for half their value. The whole math falls apart." He turned back inside, his face tight. $90 doesn't fix it anymore. "What does fix it?" "Winning the claim dispute." He pulled out his chair and sat back down hard. "Which means a lawyer. Which means money I don't have." Ruby sat across from him. She looked at the list between them, her neat, slanted handwriting, the numbers she'd built up carefully over the past 2 days. Then she looked at him. "Who's the land clerk?" she asked. "Garrett. Henry Garrett. He's been in that office 12 years. "He a fair man?" "Fairer than some." "And the Hendricks deed, is it real? Was there actually a prior claim?" Caleb thought. "Hendricks sold this land to my father. The deed's in the strongbox in the back room. I've had it since before I came back from the war." He looked up. "If Pickett's filing a claim based on that deed, he's either working from bad information or he's counting on nobody pulling the original documents before the deadline." Ruby was very still for a moment. "Pull them now," she said. "It's past 9 o'clock." "First thing tomorrow, before Pickett moves anything else." She met his eyes. "And take me with you." "Ruby..." "You said I had good eyes." She held his gaze. "Let me use them." Caleb looked at her across the table, at the list between them, at her hands flat on the wood, at the steadiness in her face that he'd first noticed on a platform in the August heat when the whole yard was deciding she was worth less than a sack of flour. "All right," he said. "First light." "First light," she agreed. She picked up the pencil and turned the list over to the blank side and started writing again. This time not numbers, but the names and facts she was holding in her mind, setting them down in order, the way you lay out tools before a job. Pickett, Garrett, Hendricks deed, creek access, October 1st. Caleb watched her write and didn't say anything. Outside, the summer night pressed close and warm against the windows, and somewhere across the south fence line, the creek ran on in the dark, indifferent to the men arguing over who owned the right to stand beside it. Ruby wrote until she had everything down. Then she folded the paper, tucked it under the edge of the flower crock so it wouldn't be lost, and said good night. She didn't sleep until nearly midnight. When she did, she dreamed of fence posts, of walking a long line of them in the dark, pressing her thumb into the base of each one, looking for the ones that were about to give. She found more than she expected. She kept walking. Ruby was up before the sky turned gray. She had the coffee on and the biscuits in the stove before Caleb's boots hit the floor in the back room. She heard him moving, the creak of the bed frame, the pour of water in the washstand basin, the quiet, unhurried sounds of a man who'd been waking alone for 9 years and hadn't yet learned to make noise for company. She had 2 cups poured by the time he came down the hall. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, at the cups, at her, already dressed and pinned, her coat across the back of her chair. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I slept enough." She set a biscuit on his plate. "Eat fast. I want to be at the land office when Garrett unlocks the door. He opens at 8. Then we leave in 20 minutes. Caleb sat down and ate without argument. That was one of the things she'd cataloged about him in the past week. He didn't argue against sense. He might push back on sentiment, on something said too hard or too fast, but never against a practical truth. She respected that more than she'd expected to. They were in the wagon before the sun was fully up, the road into Bitterroot running pale and empty ahead of them. Ruby had the folded paper in her coat pocket, the names, the facts, the sequence she'd written out the night before. She went over it in her head while the wagon rolled. Hendricksteed, Creek Access, October 1st deadline. Pickett filing with Garrett yesterday evening. Whatever Pickett had filed, he'd filed it fast. That meant either he'd been planning it for weeks and waited for the right moment, or something had changed recently that made him move now. She turned that over in her mind and couldn't reach a clean conclusion. Both possibilities were bad in different ways. "Tell me about Pickett," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "What do you want to know?" "Why he wants this land specifically. You've got a good spread, but he's got more. Why spend the money buying a debt and filing a water claim on 160 acres? "The creek," Caleb said. "The water that runs through the south quarter comes off the same source that feeds 3 other ranches east of mine. Whoever controls that access point controls the water rights for a wide stretch of land." He paused. "Pickett's been buying up grazing parcels for 5 years. If he gets the creek access, the ranchers downstream either deal with him or dry out." Ruby absorbed that. "So this isn't about your ranch. My ranch is the piece he needs to complete the line." He glanced at her. "I'm not the target. I'm the key." "He told you that?" "He didn't have to." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He bought the debt 6 weeks ago. That's before the auction." "Yes." "So when he saw you at the auction—" "He already had the note." Caleb's jaw set. "He was watching to see what kind of man I was, whether I was the kind who'd fight or the kind who'd fold." "And what did he decide?" "I imagine the jury's still out." He paused. "Until you came home with me." Then he had a new variable he hadn't calculated for. Ruby looked at him. "Me. A woman who can run accounts and haggles prices and resets fence posts before breakfast is not what he was expecting on this property." Something in Caleb's voice was careful, precise. He moved up his timeline. That's why the water claim is happening now. She sat with that for a long moment. The wagon rolled into the edge of town, the morning still quiet enough that their wheels on the main street sounded loud. "He moved because of me," she said. "He moved because of what you mean for this place." Caleb pulled the wagon up outside the land office. He set the brake and looked at her. "I should have told you that last night." "You telling me now?" She got down before he could offer his hand, not to be contrary, just because she'd been climbing down from things on her own for 34 years, and the habit was deep. "Bring the deed from the strong box." "I've got it." He patted his coat. Henry Garrett was a compact, precise man in his early 50s, who wore a green eyeshade even in the morning light and kept his desk in the kind of order that suggested he found comfort in it. He looked up when the door opened, and his gaze moved from Caleb to Ruby and back to Caleb with a careful neutrality. "Mr. Durst," he said. "Early start." "I need to look at what was filed yesterday evening," Caleb said, "pertaining to my property, The South Quarter, Creek access. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The slight tightening of a man who'd known this conversation was coming. "I can pull the file," he said. "I'd appreciate it." Garrett went to the back of the office. Ruby stood at the counter and didn't fidget. She read the notices pinned to the board on the wall. Survey boundaries, claim filings, a livestock notice, a deed transfer from 2 months back. She was still reading when Garrett came back with a folder. He laid it on the counter and opened it. "Mr. Pickett filed a claim of prior right on the creek access point at the south boundary of your property," he said. "Based on a deed recorded in 1871 under the name of," he checked the paper, "James Hendricks, which he argues establishes a prior water right predating your deed." "The Hendricks deed transferred to my father in 1873, Caleb said. He pulled his own document from his coat and laid it flat on the counter beside Garrett's file. "Full transfer of title, including water rights, signed and witnessed. You can see the recording stamp. This office, June of 73. Garrett looked at both documents side by side. He was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Pickett's filing references the 1871 deed," Garrett said carefully, "but does not reference the 73 transfer." "Because it's inconvenient," Ruby said. Both men looked at her. She didn't apologize for speaking. She leaned on the counter and looked at the documents. "May I?" Garrett looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded. Ruby picked up Pickett's filing and read it through. Not fast, not performing, just reading the way she read everything, with complete attention. She set it down and picked up the Hendricks to Durst transfer and read that too. "There's a gap in his argument," she said. "He references the original Hendricks deed as establishing prior right, but the 1873 transfer explicitly conveys." She found the line and put her finger on it without looking up. "All appurtenances thereto belonging, including water rights and access thereto." She looked at Garrett. "That language is older than his claim by 2 years. His filing has to address the 73 transfer to have any standing. It doesn't." Garrett was very still. "Is she correct?" Caleb asked. Garrett looked at the documents for a long moment. "The omission is significant," he said finally. "A claim that doesn't account for an intervening transfer of title has a structural problem." He paused. "I'll need to review this in full before I make any formal determination, but—" He stopped. "But?" Ruby said. "But if I were advising someone informally," Garrett said, choosing his words with the precision of a man who knew how every sentence could be used, "I would say that a claim with this gap is unlikely to survive a formal challenge." Ruby straightened up. "How long does he have to amend it?" 30 days from filing. "And if it's formally challenged before he amends it?" "Then the challenge would take precedence in the timeline." She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. "File the challenge today," she said. Garrett cleared his throat. "A formal challenge does require a filing fee of—" "How much?" Caleb asked. $8. Caleb reached into his coat without hesitation and put the money on the counter. Garrett took the bills and folded them neatly. "I'll prepare the filing this morning," he said. "You'll have a copy by noon." "Thank you," Caleb said. He gathered his deed from the counter, and they turned toward the door. They were almost out when Garrett spoke again. "Mr. Durst." His voice was quiet enough that it didn't carry. "Mr. Pickett came in yesterday at 6:30, closing time. He was in a hurry." A pause. Men in a hurry sometimes miss things they'd have caught if they'd slowed down. Caleb turned and looked at him. Garrett had already lowered his gaze back to his desk. "Have a good morning," he said. Outside on the street, Caleb exhaled slowly. Ruby pulled her coat closed against the morning air and started toward the wagon. "You found that gap in 40 seconds, he said, falling into step beside her. "I had all night to think about what I was looking for." "Still, don't make it more than it is. It was a document and a flaw. I've been finding flaws in things my whole life." She reached the wagon and put her hand on the rail. "The challenge buys you time. It doesn't solve the $90. One problem at a time. You don't have the luxury of one problem at a time. Pickett's going to know by this afternoon what we filed. She looked at him. He's going to be angry. Let him be angry. Caleb, angry men with money and land don't get angry quietly. She met his eyes. What does he do when he doesn't get what he wants? He was quiet, a beat too long again. What does he do? She repeated. 3 years ago, a rancher named Cole wouldn't sell him a water easement. 6 weeks later, Cole's prize bull was found dead at the creek. Nobody proved anything. He said it flatly, without drama. Cole sold the easement the following spring. Ruby looked at him. And you're just telling me this now? I didn't think it was relevant until I pushed Pickett's timeline and made his filing look sloppy in front of the land clerk. Her voice was even, but her jaw was tight. I need you to tell me things, Caleb. All of it. Not just the parts you think I can handle. I know. He said it quickly, without deflection. You're right. I'm sorry. The directness of it, no hedging, no excuse, took some of the edge off her. She looked at the street. A wagon was coming down from the north end. 2 women coming out of the dry goods store. Normal morning. Nothing out of place. We go home, she said. We do the work. We don't show him that he scared us. She turned and looked at Caleb. But you tell me if anything changes. Anything at all. I will. He met her eyes. I promise. She got in the wagon. They were a mile out of town when she asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind since Garrett's last quiet words. Is Garrett on our side? Caleb thought about it. Garrett's on the side of correct paperwork, he said, which today happens to be ours. Good enough, she said. They got back to the ranch by mid-morning. Ruby went straight to the garden and Caleb went to the barn, and for 2 hours they worked separately and in silence, which was by now its own kind of language between them. At noon, she brought sandwiches out to the fence where he was working, and they ate standing up, and she told him what she'd been calculating in the garden. The squash yield, the egg count, the rough value of the preserve jars. We're closer to 60 than I thought, she said. That's still 30 short. I know. She took a bite. The harvest social's in 3 weeks. He looked at her. What about it? People come from 4 counties. It's the biggest market day of the summer outside of the 4th. If I had preserves and butter and decent baked goods at a table. Ruby, you'd have to bake for 2 solid days. I've baked for 2 solid days before. She said it without self-pity, just fact. How much does a table cost at the social? $2? That comes off the profit. I can clear 15, maybe 20, if the jars go right. She looked at him. It's not all of it, but it's part. He was quiet for a moment. You'd be standing in front of the whole county. I'm aware. After the auction, after Pickett, after Dorothy Haynes and her... Caleb. She looked at him steadily. I was standing in front of the whole county when they priced me at 40 cents, and nobody bid. I'm still standing. I can manage a baked goods table. Something in his face shifted. That thing she'd seen before. The quiet surprise of a man who kept expecting to find a limit and kept not finding one. $2 for the table, he said. I'll pay it. Put it on the account, she said. I'll earn it back. He nodded. I know you will. That afternoon, Caleb rode out to check the south fence, and Ruby stayed at the house and began her inventory in earnest. Every jar, every crock, every possible thing that could be made or sold before the harvest social. She was deep in the cellar, counting preserves by the light of a small lantern, when she heard the horse in the yard. One horse. Fast. She came up from the cellar and went to the front window. It wasn't Caleb's horse. It was a bay she didn't recognize, and on it was a young man, early 20s, wiry, dusty from a hard ride. He was looking around the yard the way someone looks when they're checking whether they're being watched. Ruby opened the front door. The young man startled. "Ma'am, is Durst here?" "He's on the south fence. What do you need?" The man hesitated. He pulled his hat off. "My name's Tommy Ware. I worked for Pickett until this morning." He swallowed. "He let me go. Said he was cutting the crew size." He paused. "That's not why I came." Ruby looked at him. "Then why did you come?" "Because last night, after he got back from town, I heard him talking to his foreman. He was angry, real angry, not just loud angry, the other kind." Tommy turned his hat in his hands. "He said the water claim wasn't going to be enough anymore. He said he needed to make Durst's situation untenable. That was the word he used. Untenable." He looked up at her. His foreman asked how. Pickett said, "Take away what matters most." A cold feeling moved through Ruby that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Did he say what that meant?" she asked. "Not directly, but then he looked at me and realized I was standing there, and that's when he let me go." Tommy held her eyes. "I think he saw I heard it, and I think what matters most meant—" He stopped. "Meant what?" Ruby said, her voice very controlled. "You, ma'am, or the land, or both." He looked miserable. "I don't have proof. I just know how he thinks when he's that kind of angry. And I thought someone should know." Ruby stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she stepped back. "Come inside," she said. "Write down what you heard. Exact words, best as you can remember. Date it and sign it." He blinked. "Why?" "Because if something happens, I want it on paper that you warned us. And I want Pickett to know that it's on paper." She met his eyes. "That changes his calculation." Tommy came inside. She put paper and a pencil in front of him, and he wrote, slowly and carefully, in the handwriting of a man who'd learned letters late but took them seriously. When he was done, she read it, folded it, and put it with the deed documents in the strongbox. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Got a cousin in Casper. I'll head there." "Is Pickett the kind to follow?" "Not for a ranch hand." He put his hat back on. "For evidence, maybe. So I'll ride fast." She nodded. "Thank you," she said. "What you did took nerve." He looked at her for a moment. Looked at her the way people rarely looked at her, which was like she was someone worth looking at directly. "My ma was a big woman," he said simply. "Good woman. People underestimated her, too." He touched his hat brim. "You take care, ma'am." He was out the door and on his horse and gone before she'd processed that fully. She stood in the kitchen and stared at the strongbox and thought, take away what matters most. Caleb came in from the south fence 40 minutes later, and she told him everything before he'd had a chance to take his hat off. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was very still for a moment. "He's going to move on the livestock," he said. "That's what I think too. If I lose the 2 steers before I can sell them, there goes our buffer." "The steers need to be sold now," Ruby said. "Not in a week. Tomorrow." "The price'll be lower if I rush." "The price'll be nothing if he acts first." She held his eyes. "Tomorrow, Caleb." He ran his hand over his face. "I know a buyer in Douglas. Fair man. He won't lowball me bad." He paused. "It's a full day's ride. I'd have to leave at first light and wouldn't be back until the following morning." "Then go." "I don't want to leave you here alone." "I'm not made of glass." "I know that." He looked at her. "Pickett isn't the man who puts his hands on women. He's more careful than that. But his foreman is not a careful man." Ruby was quiet for a moment. She absorbed that. What's his foreman's name? Crane. Ed Crane. Has Crane been on this property before? No. Does he know the layout? No. Then I'll have the advantage if something happens. She said it the way she said everything, flatly, without bravado. I know where the rifle is. I know where the cellar door is. I know every inch of this yard. She looked at him. You need to sell those steers. Ruby, Caleb. She stopped him with the firmness of it. Go, sell the steers. Come back. I will be here when you get back. I have been managing dangerous situations on my own since I was 12 years old, and I am not going to stop now because a man with too much land is unhappy with us. He held her gaze for a long time. She could see the conflict in him, the practicality warring with something else, something he wasn't ready to name out loud yet. She recognized it because she felt the same thing in reverse, and she wasn't ready to name it either. First light, he said at last. First light, she agreed. He went to put the horses in for the evening, and she started supper, and neither of them said anything more about Pickett or Crane or the winter that was coming. They ate at the table in the lamplight, and talked instead about the harvest social, about which preserves sold best at which price, about whether peach or apple butter moved faster, and why. It was a deliberate normalcy, and they both knew it, and it was better for the knowing. After supper, Caleb stood at the door for a moment before going down the hall. You know, he said, without turning around, when I walked into that auction yard, I was thinking about nothing except getting back before dark. Practical errand. Get a cook, get home. He paused. And then I saw you on that platform. Ruby looked at his back. You weren't looking at anyone, he said. You were looking at the fence posts at the far end of the yard, like you were already thinking about what was past it. He turned around then. His face in the lamplight was difficult to read, but she'd been reading difficult faces her whole life. I thought, there's a woman who's already looking for the way through. I wanted to know what she'd find. Ruby didn't move. I still want to know, he said quietly. Whatever's on the other side of all this with Pickett and the land and the $90. I want to see where you get to. She looked at him for a long moment, a full, honest moment, with nothing deflecting it. Don't get sentimental on me the night before you leave, she said. I won't sleep. His mouth moved, that slight, crooked shift she'd learned to watch for. Good night, Ruby. Good night, she said. Come back safe. He went down the hall. She heard the click of his door. She sat at the table for a while after, her hands around a cooling cup of coffee, the lantern burning low. She took the strongbox key from her pocket and set it on the table. She thought about Tommy Ware's face when he'd said, "Take away what matters most." She thought about Pickett's folded paper, delivered with that smooth, professional smile. She thought about 48 days and $90 and 2 steers and a harvest social and a gap in a legal filing. Then she thought about the bolt on her door, the clean basin on the washstand, the east-facing window, and the light falling soft through the glass on her first morning here. Because this is the first place I've ever been more than a burden. She hadn't said those words yet. She'd thought them plenty. But they'd been sitting in her chest, waiting. She stood up, took the lantern, and walked down the hall to her room. She did not bolt the door. Not because she wasn't careful, because she was beginning to understand the difference between caution and walls. And she was, slowly, reluctantly, with every bit of resistance a 34-year-old woman who'd been let down 4 times had left in her, beginning to take one down. She lay down on the narrow bed and pulled the quilt up and listened to the summer night outside the window. Crickets, wind in the grass, the horses settling. She was nearly asleep when she heard it. So faint, she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. From the direction of the barn. A sound that didn't belong to the night. She was on her feet and at the window before she was fully awake, the quilt falling behind her, her boots already in her hand. The barn door was open. A thin thread of orange light moved inside it. Not lantern light. Too irregular. Too alive. Fire. She was already running. She hit the barn door with her shoulder and it swung wide. The smell reached her before the heat did. Sharp. Chemical. Not the smell of hay catching by accident. This fire had help. She could tell the difference. She'd grown up around enough cook fires and lamp accidents to know what careless looked like. This wasn't careless. The east wall of the hay storage was burning up the dry wood in long, hungry lines. Not the whole barn, not yet, but moving fast toward the stalls where Caleb's 2 remaining horses stood screaming against their ropes, eyes white, hooves striking the stall boards in blind panic. Ruby didn't stop to think about it. Thinking was for after. She grabbed the nearest water bucket from the hook by the door and threw it at the base of the closest flame. Bought herself 3 seconds, nothing more. Then dropped the bucket and went straight for the first stall. The mare was rearing, rope pulled taut, nostrils flared in the smoke. Ruby got her hand on the halter and pulled down hard, talking low and fast. The kind of voice that isn't calm, but pretends to be. "Easy, easy, I've got you. Come on." The mare fought her for 1 terrible second. Then something in the animal gave, and she came down, and Ruby had the rope undone and slapped her flank hard, and sent her bolting through the open door into the night. The smoke was thicker now. Ruby pulled the neck of her nightgown up over her mouth and went for the second stall. The gelding was worse, spinning in the tight space, hooves coming down unpredictable. She took a blow to her left shoulder that sent a white shock of pain down her arm and nearly dropped her. She didn't drop. She grabbed the halter with her right hand and hauled, and the rope came loose, and she threw her weight into the horse's neck and turned him toward the door. He bolted. She went with him halfway, and then let go, and stumbled out of the barn door into the yard. She hit her knees on the hard dirt and stayed there for a moment, coughing, her eyes streaming. The shoulder throbbed. She breathed. The horses were loose and running across the yard toward the fence. Scared, but not on fire, which was what mattered. She got back up. The barn was going to burn. She accepted that in the same flat, practical way she accepted hard things. Not without feeling, but without the luxury of standing still. The question wasn't the barn anymore. The question was whether the fire spread to the house. And the answer to that was in the water trough and the space between the 2 buildings, and how fast she could think. She grabbed the second bucket, filled it from the trough, threw it at the near corner of the barn wall closest to the house. Grabbed the third, then the fourth. She worked in a short, brutal loop. Trough to wall, trough to wall. Her arms burning, her shoulders screaming with every lift. The smoke pressing in around her. She was on her 6th bucket when a voice came from behind her. "That's enough of that." She turned. Ed Crane was standing at the edge of the yard. She'd never seen him before, but she knew him immediately. The foreman Caleb had described, the not careful one. He was thick through the chest, and he held himself with the easy confidence of a man used to being the largest thing in any given situation. He had a rifle across his arm, not raised, just present. A reminder. Ruby set the bucket down. "Mr. Pickett send you?" she asked. Crane smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Mr. Pickett doesn't know I'm here." That was the worst answer he could have given her, and they both knew it. A man following orders had limits. A man operating on his own judgment had none. "What do you want?" she said. "Want you to go inside and pack what you can carry," he said. Still easy, still unhurried, like this was a reasonable conversation between reasonable people. And then I want you to be gone from here before Durst gets back. Gone where? Anywhere that isn't this property. He tilted his head. You came from an auction. You can go back to one. Or don't. That's your business. But this ranch, he glanced at the burning barn behind her, is about to have a bad season. And a smart woman would know when to step away from a bad situation. Ruby looked at him. Her shoulder was still throbbing. Her eyes were still stinging. She was standing in a nightgown in the middle of the night, with an armed man 12 feet away, telling her to leave the only place she'd chosen for herself in 34 years. No, she said. Crane's smile faded. Ma'am, I said no. Her voice didn't shake. She was almost surprised at herself. I'm not leaving this property. You're going to put that rifle down and get off this land, and then you're going to ride back and tell Pickett that his foreman came here and burned a barn and threatened a woman alone, and see how that sits with a county that's watching what he does. Crane's expression went flat. Nobody's watching. Henry Garrett is watching, she said. Tommy Ware wrote down what he heard and signed it, and it's in the strongbox in that house. And if you touch that house, or touch me, it all goes to Garrett in the morning, with names and dates and exact words. She held his eyes. Is that worth it to you? For Pickett? Something moved behind Crane's eyes. A calculation. She'd surprised him. He'd expected fear. He'd expected begging, or running, or collapsing. He hadn't expected her to know Tommy's name. The pause lasted 4 seconds. 5. Smart woman, he said finally. But the ease was gone from his voice. I've had to be, she said. Leave. Another pause. The barn crackled behind her. Then Crane lowered the rifle to his side and turned and walked back into the dark. And she heard hooves a moment later. A horse waiting out by the road, already pointed away. She listened until the sound was completely gone. Then her legs went unreliable for the first time all night, and she sat down hard on the edge of the water trough and put her head in her hands and breathed. Her shoulder hurt badly. Her throat hurt from the smoke. Her hands were shaking in a way she hadn't let herself notice while Crane was standing there. She let them shake now, for about 30 seconds. Then she stood up, went inside, and put the strongbox behind the loose stone in the fireplace that she'd found 2 weeks ago and never mentioned. She checked the rifle on the wall. Loaded, which she'd verified her first morning here, and checked every day since, because that was the kind of woman she was. She pulled a chair to the window that faced the yard, and sat in it with a rifle across her lap. She didn't sleep. At first light, she was still in the chair. The barn was a ruin. Charred framing, collapsed roof on the east side, the smell of burned wood heavy in the still morning air. The horses were in the far corner of the yard, calmed by the night, but still uneasy. The house was untouched. She put the coffee on and made biscuits, because her hands needed something to do, and she was sitting at the table with her second cup when she heard a horse on the road. She had the rifle off the wall and at the door before she'd consciously decided to move. It was Caleb. He came into the yard at a trot, and she could tell from the way he was riding that he'd seen the barn from the road. His posture had changed, pulled tight and forward. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped and was across the yard in 6 strides. She lowered the rifle. He stopped 3 feet from her and looked at her face. The red eyes, the smoke still in her hair, the set of her jaw. His own face did something complicated. You're all right, he said. I'm all right. The horses, in the yard, both of them, I got them out. He looked at the barn, back at her. Who? Crane. She watched the anger move across his face. Not loud, not explosive. The cold kind that's worse. His jaw went tight. His eyes went still, and the way she'd learned meant he was making a decision. "Where is he now?" "Gone. I sent him off." She paused. "He's not the one who concerns me." Caleb looked at her. "You sent Crane off." With the information that Tommy Ware's signed statement was in the strongbox, and that Henry Garrett would have it by morning if anything happened. She kept her voice level. "He left." Caleb stared at her for a moment. Then something in his face broke open in a way she hadn't seen before. Not relief exactly, not admiration. Something rawer than both. He stepped forward and put his hands on her face. Her round, smoke-streaked face, his callous thumbs on her cheekbones, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he came very close to losing. "Ruby," he said, his voice rough. She didn't pull away. She looked back at him. "I sold the steers," he said. "I got $62. He was still holding her face. "I turned around 6 hours into the ride because I just couldn't." He stopped. "I should have been here." "If you'd been here, Crane might have put that rifle to different use," she said. "I had the advantage because I was alone. He underestimated me." She reached up and put her hands over his. "You being gone was the right call. It just wasn't comfortable." "That's one word for it." "Go check the horses," she said gently. "Then come eat something. You've been riding since midnight." He didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed on her face, like he was making sure she was really there. Every part of her, all in one piece. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "Go check the horses." He went. She watched him cross the yard, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved through the smoke smell without flinching. And she thought about his hands on her face, and the rawness in his voice, and the $62 he'd ridden through the night to bring home. She went inside and put more biscuits on. They ate at the table, and she told him everything. Crane's words, her response, the strongbox, the chair by the window, the rifle. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You sat in that chair all night," he said. "Yes." "With the rifle?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Caleb, I've been alone in worse situations than a burned barn with a man who thought twice before he acted." She looked at him. "What concerns me now is that Crane said Pickett didn't send him. If that's true, Pickett's going to be angry about the barn. Not because he cares about your barn, because Crane acted outside his control and left evidence." Caleb considered that. Pickett hates loose ends. Which means he might cut Crane loose. And if Crane gets cut loose with no protection, he becomes a liability Pickett once managed. She paused. Tommy Ware was smart to ride to Casper. "And the statement in the strongbox?" "Still there. I moved it behind the fireplace stone, but it's there." She looked at him. "I think we take it to Garrett today. Don't wait." "That makes it official." "It already is official. We're just putting it where Pickett can't reach it." She pushed her plate back. "We have 62 from the steers. We have maybe 30 from before. We need 90 for the debt payment, and 8 more for the challenge filing, which you already paid." She worked it in her head. "We're close. The harvest social is in 2 weeks. The barn needs rebuilding before winter." "One thing at a time." "You said I didn't have the luxury of one thing at a time." "I said that to you. I'm allowed to say different things to myself." She stood and picked up the plates. "The debt gets cleared, then the barn, then winter." She paused at the dry sink. "And we stop letting Pickett set the schedule. We set ours." Caleb watched her. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said. "I can't imagine." "That auction yard." He leaned back in his chair. "You were looking at the fence posts. Everyone else on that platform was looking at the crowd, looking for someone to help them, or someone to avoid. You were looking past all of it." He shook his head slowly. "I don't think I've ever met anyone who could do that. Look past the worst of something and see what's on the other side." Ruby stood at the dry sink with her back to him. She looked out the east window, the morning light coming in at its familiar angle.
"You do it too," she said. "You just don't notice."
"How so?" "You looked at me on that platform and didn't see what everyone else saw." She turned around and faced him. "That's the same skill." He held her gaze. "What did everyone else see?" She raised an eyebrow at him. "I know what they saw," he said quietly. "I want to hear what you think I saw instead." She was quiet for a moment. "I think you saw someone who'd been knocked down enough times to know exactly how to get back up." She paused. "And I think you thought that was useful." "I thought it was remarkable," he said, and his voice was so simple and direct that she didn't have a response for it. No deflection came. Nothing. She turned back to the dishes. "We should go to Garrett's this morning," she said. "Yes," he said, and let her have the redirect. They were in the wagon by 9. Garrett received them with the same careful precision as before, took the signed statement from Ruby's hands, read it, and dated his receipt of it in the official ledger without comment. The comment he did make was, as before, quiet enough to constitute deniability. "Mr. Pickett was in this morning," Garrett said, not looking up from his ledger. "Early. He'd heard about the fire." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "What did he say?" "He was—" Garrett considered his word choice. "Displeased. He indicated that the barn fire was an unfortunate accident and asked whether any damage claims had been filed against neighboring parties." He paused. "I told him I had no such filing as of yet." "And now?" Ruby asked. Garrett looked at the signed statement he'd just received. "Now I have relevant documentation pertaining to the situation." He said it in the file. "Accidents have causes. Causes have witnesses." Ruby looked at him. "He's going to know we filed this." "He will learn of it, yes, and then he'll know that Crane acted outside his orders and left evidence." Garrett met her eyes. "That is a conclusion reasonable people might draw." "Which makes Crane's position with Pickett difficult." "Quite." Garrett straightened his files with the precise movements of a man who had said everything he intended to say. "Is there anything else I can help you with this morning?" "The challenge filing we made yesterday," Caleb said. "Has Pickett responded?" "He has 14 days to file a response before the challenge proceeds by default." Garrett paused. "I would not be surprised if his attention is somewhat divided at present." They left the land office and stood on the street for a moment. Ruby's shoulder still ached from the blow the gelding had given her, but she hadn't mentioned it to Caleb, and didn't plan to. "He's going to fold on the water claim," she said. "Maybe." "Not maybe. He burned the barn to scare us off before the challenge went through. It didn't work. Now Crane is a liability he has to manage. The signed statement is in Garrett's file, and the challenge is on the record." She turned to look at Caleb. "He's not stupid. He's going to cut his losses." Caleb was looking down the street. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "I talked to the buyer in Douglas, Horace Emery. He buys cattle up and down the territory." He paused. He mentioned Pickett's name. Said Pickett had been buying debts from the Cheyenne Bank for 6 months. Not just mine. 3 other ranchers along the creek line. Ruby went still. "How many?" 3 confirmed. Maybe more. His jaw tightened. "This isn't just about my south quarter. He's been building a position on the whole creek for half a year." "And the other ranchers? Do they know?" "Emery didn't think so. He told me because—" Caleb paused. "He said he told me because I came in with enough to clear my own debt clean, and I didn't seem like the kind of man who'd keep something useful to himself." Ruby looked at him. Something shifted in her understanding, a piece clicking into a larger shape. If the other ranchers know, she said slowly, if they file challenges the same way we did, with the same gap in Pickett's argument about the Hendricks deed, he can't fight 4 challenges at once. He can't fight 4 challenges at once and manage Crane, and manage the statement in Garrett's file, and maintain his credibility in this county. She heard her own voice picking up pace. His whole position depends on each rancher thinking they're alone. That's why he works them one at a time. Caleb was nodding slowly. You need to talk to those 3 ranchers, she said. Today. I was thinking tomorrow. Caleb. She turned to face him fully. He is going to cut Crane loose. When he does, Crane has nothing to lose and every reason to make moves of his own. We have maybe 2 days before this situation becomes something different and worse. She held his eyes. Today. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I know 2 of them, Cole and a man named Brower. Cole's 10 miles south. Brower's the other direction. Split them. You take Cole, I take Brower. He blinked. You don't know Brower. I know what to tell him. Ruby. Caleb. She said it with a patience she was running thin on. I am standing here. I have been standing here through the auction, and Pickett's paper, and Crane, and a barn fire, and a night in a chair with a rifle. I am not decorative. Use me. He was quiet for 1 beat. Brower's about 8 miles east, he said. Take the road past the Miller property and turn north at the Split Oak. Does he know you? He knows of me. That's enough. She held out her hand for the wagon reins. He handed them over. They parted ways outside town, Caleb riding south on his horse toward Cole's property, Ruby driving the wagon east on the road she'd just been given directions for. Her shoulder ached with every rut in the road. She held the reins straight and didn't favor it. Ernst Brower was a German immigrant in his 60s who'd been on his land for 20 years and regarded strangers with the particular wariness of a man who'd built everything he had by his own labor and trusted no one to maintain it for him. He came out of his barn when the wagon pulled up and looked at Ruby on the seat with an expression that was not welcoming. Mr. Brower, she said, my name is Ruby Calloway. I'm with Caleb Durst's ranch, North Property. I need about 10 minutes of your time on something that concerns both our operations. He looked at her. Durst's woman? Durst's partner, she said evenly. Do you have 10 minutes or not? He had 10 minutes. She laid it out clean and fast. Pickett's debt purchases, the gap in the Hendricks deed argument, the challenge filing, the statement in Garrett's office. She didn't editorialize. She didn't soften it. She told him exactly what they knew and exactly what it implied, and exactly what a challenge filing would require from him. Brower listened with his arms crossed and his face skeptical, until she got to the part about 3 other ranchers along the creek line. Then his arms came down. He has my debt too, Brower said. Yes, sir, I believe he does. I thought it was the bank still holding it. The bank sold it to him 6 weeks ago, same as Durst's. She held his gaze. He owns the approach to your water access the same way he owns ours. If we don't challenge it collectively, he wins by default on each of us separately. Brower was quiet for a moment. He looked at his land, at the fence line, at the creek glinting past the south edge of his property. Then he looked back at her. You said the gap in the deed argument is the 1873 transfer. Yes, sir. You've seen the documents. I read them in Garrett's office. He studied her. You read legal documents. I read everything. She held his eyes. Will you come to town and file the challenge? A long pause. Tomorrow, he said. Today would be better. Woman, I have 30 head that need moving before sundown. Then I'll wait, she said. Or you can ride in at first light tomorrow. But don't wait past that. He looked at her one more time with the measuring look of a man recalibrating, the same look Caleb had given her that first day in the garden. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "First light," he said. She drove back toward town with the afternoon light coming low and gold through the wagon boards. And she thought about Pickett, sitting somewhere with the knowledge that his clean, sequential plan was fraying from 3 directions at once. She thought about Crane, cut loose or soon to be, unpredictable and cornered. She thought about the harvest social in 13 days, and the $90, and the challenge filing, and the name on the deed. She was almost back to the main road when she saw the rider coming toward her at a hard gallop. It was a boy, 14, maybe 15, on a brown horse. He pulled up sharp when he saw the wagon, and his face was urgent. "Ma'am, are you from the Durst Ranch?" "I am." "I've been sent to find you. Sheriff Holt sent me." The boy was breathless. "There's a man in town, Ed Crane. He came in an hour ago and went to the saloon, and he's been talking, ma'am, loud, saying things about the barn fire." The boy swallowed. "He's saying it was an accident he witnessed. He's saying Durst's—" He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "What is he saying about Durst?" Ruby asked, her voice carefully controlled. "He's not saying about Mr. Durst, ma'am." The boy met her eyes. "He's saying it was your doing. He's saying you knocked a lantern in the barn and the fire started from that. He's saying you're—" Another stop. "That you're not right in the head. That Mr. Durst doesn't know what he brought home." Everything in the wagon went very quiet. "Where is Sheriff Holt?" she asked. "He's at the saloon, ma'am. He's trying to calm Crane down before it gets worse. He said if you were reachable, you ought to come." Ruby picked up the reins. "Ride ahead and tell Sheriff Holt I'm coming." "Yes, ma'am." The boy wheeled his horse and kicked it into a gallop. Ruby turned the wagon toward town, her jaw set and her hands steady on the reins. Crane had made his choice. Cut loose by Pickett, cornered by the statement in Garrett's file. He decided that a fence was better than waiting. He was going to put the fire on her, the fat woman from the auction, the one nobody thought was worth 60 cents, the one who'd been placed 4 times and come from nothing, and was nobody's idea of credible. It was not a bad calculation, she thought, with the cold clarity of someone who'd learned to see how people underestimated her and use it. Except he didn't know about Tommy Ware's statement. He didn't know she'd been expecting this exact move since the night before. And he didn't know that she'd learned, over 34 years of managing other people's households, that the most important thing you could do when someone tried to take your credibility was get there first with the truth. She had the truth. It was in Garrett's file, signed and dated before Crane had opened his mouth today. She clicked her tongue at the team, and the wagon moved faster toward town. She was going to walk into that saloon, and she was going to stand in front of Crane and Sheriff Holt and whoever else was in that room. And she was going to be exactly what she'd been on that platform in the August heat. Broad and still, feet planted, looking straight ahead, letting them say their worst. And then she was going to take it apart. She didn't need rescuing. She never had. What she needed was a room. And she was about to have one. The saloon was louder than it should have been at 3 in the afternoon. Ruby could hear it from the street before she tied the team to the hitching post. Crane's voice, carrying through the bat-wing doors, broad and confident, the voice of a man who'd decided that the best defense was a loud offense and was committing to it fully. She tied the reins, straightened her coat, and walked in. The room went quieter the moment she stepped through the doors. Not silent. Crane was still talking, his back to her, working a small audience of 3 men at the bar and 2 more at a corner table. Sheriff Holt stood near the far wall with his arms crossed, a compact man in his late 40s with a gray mustache and the patient expression of someone who had learned to wait out situations before acting. He saw Ruby come in, and something in his posture shifted. Not relief exactly, but a kind of readiness. Crane hadn't turned around yet. He was finishing his sentence.
Woman's not been right since she got here. Caleb Durst's a decent man, but he doesn't know what he's brought onto that property. I saw her near that barn at midnight, and I'm telling you, a lantern don't just—
Mr. Crane, Ruby said. He stopped, turned. He went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, then a fast recalculation, then the settling into a new position, the way a man shifts his weight before a fight. "Ma'am," he said, and the word had nothing respectful in it. "You're describing a fire on Caleb Durst's property," she said. She kept her voice even and her hands loose at her sides. "I was there that night, so I have some interest in the accuracy of what you're saying." "I was there too," Crane said. "I know you were." She looked at him directly. "You were there with a rifle, standing 20 feet from a barn you'd set alight, telling me to pack my things and leave." The room went fully quiet now. Crane's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime." She turned to look at Sheriff Holt. "I have a signed statement in Henry Garrett's office, filed yesterday morning, from a witness who heard Ed Crane discuss making Caleb Durst's situation," she let the word land clean, "untenable. The statement was signed and dated before last night. It's on the record." Holt straightened. "Tommy Ware?" he asked. She looked at him. "You know Tommy Ware?" "I know he worked Pickett's spread. I know he left yesterday." Holt's eyes moved between Ruby and Crane, with the careful attention of a man assembling something. "I didn't know he'd filed a statement." "Garrett has it," Ruby said. "You're welcome to walk over and read it." Crane hadn't moved, but the confidence that had been holding up his posture was doing something different now. Compressing, going internal, the way confidence does when it realizes it's been miscalculated. "The woman's lying," he said. But his voice had lost its carrying quality. It was flat and defensive now, addressed to Holt rather than the room. "I'm not lying," Ruby said. "I've never had enough protection to afford lying. Every true thing I have I keep track of. That's how people like me survive." She looked at him steadily. "You came onto that property last night, and you threatened me. You said Pickett didn't send you. That may be the only true thing you said." She paused. "Which means you did this alone, for your own reasons. And whatever arrangement you thought you had with Pickett is gone now. Because men like Pickett don't protect men who act outside their orders and leave witnesses." Something moved in Crane's face. She'd cut the right wire. She could tell by the way his eyes went briefly inward, the fast private panic of a man who'd already known this and hadn't wanted to hear it said out loud in a room full of people. "You don't know anything about my arrangement," he said. "I know you're standing in a saloon making accusations because you've run out of other moves," she said. "I know that statement in Garrett's office goes to a county judge if anything else happens to that property or anyone on it. And I know that Caleb Durst is going to walk through that door eventually. And when he does, you want to be gone." Holt stepped forward from the wall. "Crane," he said, "I think you ought to come talk to me. Private." Crane looked at the sheriff, at Ruby, at the bar, where the 3 men had turned fully away from their drinks and were watching with the avid, uncomfortable interest of people witnessing something they'd be talking about for a week. He set his glass on the bar. "I'm done here," he said. "Yes, sir," Ruby said. "You are." He walked past her toward the doors. He didn't look at her. She stepped aside to give him room, not out of deference, but because she was done with him and didn't need to prove it by staying in his path. Holt followed Crane out. At the door, he paused and looked back at Ruby. "I'll want to speak with Durst when he's back." "He'll be back this afternoon," she said. "We'll come to you." Holt nodded once and went out. The saloon breathed again. One of the men at the bar, older, white-haired, a face she didn't know, picked up his glass and said quietly, not quite to her and not quite not, "Well handled, ma'am." She didn't answer. She walked out.
She was untying the team from the post when Caleb rode up the street from the south, and she knew from his face that someone had told him before he reached her. His jaw was set, and his eyes were moving over her the way they'd moved over her that morning in the yard. The fast inventory of a man checking for damage. "I'm fine," she said before he reached her. He pulled up his horse. "Crane is with the sheriff. It's handled." She finished untying the reins. "Cole?" Caleb blinked at the redirect. "Cole will file the challenge tomorrow. He's known about the debt for 2 weeks. Didn't know what to do about it. He was relieved to have a direction." He swung down from the horse. "How did you handle Crane?" "I told the truth faster than he could lie." She looked at him. "Brower will file tomorrow morning. He already knew about the debt. He didn't know about the deed gap." Caleb was looking at her with that expression again, the quiet, serious one that she'd been refusing to fully acknowledge for 2 weeks. "What?" she said. "You came in here alone," he said. "Crane was in that saloon telling a room full of men that you set your own barn on fire." "I know what he was saying." "And you walked in and dismantled it." "I had the truth, and I had the timing, and I knew the argument he was going to make before he made it." She met his eyes. "I told you I didn't need protecting." "I know you did." He stepped closer. "I'm not talking about protecting. I'm talking about the fact that you were alone in that saloon." He stopped. Tried again. "When Tommy Ware warned us, my first thought was the land and the debt. Your first thought was the sequence, how it would unfold, what Crane would do when Pickett cut him." His voice was low. "You were 3 moves ahead of everyone, and you were doing it alone in the middle of the night in a chair with a rifle." She looked at him. "Is there a question in there somewhere?" "Yeah," he said. "How much longer are you going to make me ask it?" She was quiet. "Ruby." He was standing close enough now that she had to look up slightly to hold his eyes, which she did, without flinching. "I'm not talking about the arrangement. I'm not talking about the ranch or the debt or the South Quarter. I'm asking about you." He paused. "About us." The street was not empty. 2 women coming out of the dry goods store across the way had slowed without quite stopping. She was aware of that. She was also aware that she was standing in front of the saloon in a smoke-smelling coat with bruised hands and a shoulder that still ached, and that she had just walked into a room full of hostile attention and walked back out with her ground intact, and that the man in front of her had ridden through the night on nothing but concern for a woman he'd bought for 60 cents 3 weeks ago. "I told you," she said. "I'm not ready." "You didn't bolt your door last night," he said quietly. She stopped. "I noticed," he said. "I'm not making it into something, I'm just—" He let out a slow breath. "I noticed." She looked at him for a long moment. The 2 women across the street had given up pretending and were watching openly. She was accustomed to being watched. She'd been watched her whole life. The difference was that right now, she didn't care. "Ask me properly," she said. "Not on the street, not with half the county looking." Something in his face shifted. That quiet, crooked movement at the corner of his mouth that she had catalogued and named and refused to admit she'd catalogued and named. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she agreed. She got in the wagon. He tied his horse to the back and climbed up beside her, and they drove out of Bitterroot in the afternoon light with a sense of something shifting in the air between them. Not resolved, not yet, but moving. They stopped at Garrett's office on the way out of town. Ruby told Garrett what had happened in the saloon. Garrett listened with his characteristic precision and made a note in his ledger and said, without inflection, that the statement on file made any accusation against Ruby regarding the barn fire effectively moot, and that he would be happy to so inform the county recorder if the matter were raised formally. "It won't be raised formally," Ruby said. Garrett looked at her,
"No," he said. "I don't expect it will be." Outside, Caleb said, "You know Garrett's on our side." "Garrett's on the side of correct paperwork," she said, repeating his own words back to him from 2 days ago, "which, continuously, turns out to be ours." He almost smiled. They were a mile from home when they saw the rider coming toward them from the north. Not urgent, not Crane, not a boy with bad news. A compact man in a good coat, on a well-kept horse, riding with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided on his approach in advance. Wade Pickett. Ruby felt Caleb's posture change beside her on the seat. The tightening, the controlled stillness. She felt her own. Pickett pulled up alongside the wagon and didn't smile this time. The easy confidence was still there, but it was thinner than before, a surface over something more careful. "Durst," he said. "Ma'am?" He looked at Ruby when he said the second word, and whatever assessment he'd been running on her since the auction yard had clearly arrived at a new conclusion. "Pickett," Caleb said. "I heard there was trouble at your barn last night." "There was. I want you to know that was not something I authorized." "I know," Caleb said. "Crane told my wife that himself." The word wife dropped into the space between the two men like a stone into still water. Pickett's eyes moved to Ruby, then back to Caleb. "I see," Pickett said. A pause. "Crane's been let go." "Good," Caleb said. Pickett looked down at his horse's neck for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression had changed. Not concession exactly, but a different kind of calculation. The calculation of a man deciding what the least costly exit looked like. "I'd like to discuss the water claim," he said. "I'll bet you would," Caleb said. The filing had an error. "It had a gap," Ruby said. "Specifically, it failed to account for the 1873 deed transfer that conveyed full water rights to the Durst property. You built a claim on the 1871 deed without acknowledging the document that supersedes it." She held his eyes. "That's not an error. That's a structural failure." Pickett looked at her for a long moment. She watched him decide whether to argue and decide not to. "I'm withdrawing the filing," he said. The wagon was very quiet. "In exchange for?" Caleb asked. "Nothing," Pickett said, and the word cost him. She could see it cost him. "The claim doesn't stand. I'm withdrawing it." Caleb was still for a moment. "And the debt on the South Quarter?" "I'll sell it back to the bank at face value," Pickett said. "You can settle it there." "I'll settle it with you directly," Caleb said. "Today." He reached inside his coat. "I have $92. That clears the principal and the outstanding interest." Pickett looked at the money. Something moved in his face. Not quite surprise, but close to it. He'd expected the debt to be the last piece of leverage. It wasn't. He took the money. He counted it without embarrassment. He folded it and put it in his vest. "I'll send you a receipt by end of week," he said. "You'll send me a receipt tomorrow," Caleb said. "Signed, witnessed, and with a copy to Garrett's office." Pickett looked at him. At Ruby. At the two of them side by side on the wagon seat. "Tomorrow," he said. He touched his hat brim, to Caleb, not to Ruby, and turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come, and they watched him go until the sound of hooves was gone. Caleb let out a breath that he'd probably been holding for 3 weeks. "He'll be back," Ruby said. "Not for this land, but he doesn't stop. Men like him don't." "I know." He picked up the reins. "But not today." "Not today," she agreed. They drove home. The yard looked different when they pulled in. Not the barn, which was a ruin and would be for a while, but the house, solid and square, with the afternoon light coming off the porch boards. The horses were grazing along the fence line, calm and unhurried. The garden ran along the south wall, the squash coming in heavy, the beans finally turning. Ruby got down from the wagon and stood in the yard and looked at the house, and felt something she didn't have a word for, that was made of equal parts exhaustion and something much warmer. She went inside and started supper. They ate with the windows open and the summer evening coming in soft around the curtains. And neither of them talked about Pickett or Crane or the receipt that would arrive tomorrow, or the 3 other ranchers who would file their challenges by morning. They talked about the barn, what lumber they'd need, how long it would take, whether the foundation wall was sound enough to rebuild from, or whether they'd need to start fresh. Start fresh, Ruby said. The east wall's compromised all the way down. That's 4 weeks of work. It's 4 weeks of work we're here for, she said. He looked at her across the table. You said that like it's settled, he said. Isn't it? I was going to ask you tonight, he said. Properly. You said tonight. She looked at her plate. She was quiet for a moment. You don't have to make it formal, she said. I want to. Caleb, Ruby, he set his fork down. I bought a woman's hat for a woman who'd been here 2 days. I moved money I needed for the barn to clear a debt she helped me fight for. I turned around 6 hours into a cattle ride because I couldn't stand the thought of her alone in a situation I'd put her in. He held her eyes. That's not an arrangement. That stopped being an arrangement a long time ago, and I think you know it. She looked at him. Her hands were flat on the table. I'm not easy to live with, she said. Neither am I. I take up space. So do I. I mean it literally, Caleb. So do I. His voice was steady and without any edge to it. Ruby, I'm not asking for easy. I'm not asking for small. I'm asking for you, exactly as you are. She held his gaze for a long, full moment, and she thought about the bolt on the door she hadn't thrown, about the hat that had smelled of cedar, about the way he held fence posts while she wrapped wire and never once told her how, about $62 ridden through the night, about hands on her face in a smoky yard. She thought about what she'd told herself on the porch that first night, looking at the east window. One night. You see what one night looks like. One night had become 3 weeks. 3 weeks had become something she didn't have a category for, because she'd been building the category from scratch. And it had turned out to be larger than she'd planned. You ask me in the morning, she said. Her voice was quiet. When everything's not on top of us. When the yard's clean and the coffee's on and it's just a morning. He was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow morning? Tomorrow morning, she said. He nodded once. He picked his fork back up. Outside, the wheat moved in the evening wind, and the horses were quiet along the fence, and the summer night settled in around the house like something that belonged there. She didn't bolt her door. She lay down in the narrow bed under Nora's quilt and looked at the east window and thought, this is the first place I've ever been more than a burden. She'd thought it before, plenty of times in the past 3 weeks. But tonight it felt different. Not just observed, not just noted. Owned. She fell asleep before the last light was gone, and slept without dreaming. She was up before dawn, coffee on, biscuits in the stove, the kitchen quiet and familiar around her in the way it had become familiar. The creak of the 3rd floorboard, the way the east window caught the first gray light, the particular smell of this house in the early morning that was wood smoke and flour, and something underneath that was just home. She heard his boots on the floor at the end of the hall, the pour of water in the washstand, the unhurried sounds of a man who was learning to make noise for company. He came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. 2 cups on the table, biscuits on the rack, her standing at the dry sink with her hands wrapped around her own cup, looking at him. Morning, she said. Morning. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway and looked at her the way he'd looked at her 100 small times in 3 weeks. The way a man looks at something he's decided to trust. Ask me, she said. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. He didn't go down on a knee, He stood in front of her, eye level, close enough that she could see the lines at the corner of his eyes, and the old scar along his jaw, and the steadiness in his face that had been there from the first day and hadn't wavered once. "Ruby Calloway," he said, "will you stay? Not, will you marry me? Not, will you be my wife? Will you stay?" She understood why he'd chosen those words. She understood that he'd thought about them. She understood that they were the most honest question he could ask, and the one that required the most honest answer. Because staying wasn't a ceremony, wasn't a document. Staying was a choice made every morning, made with full knowledge of the cost. "Yes," she said. He took the cup gently from her hands and set it on the counter, and put his hands on her face, the way he had in the yard after the fire. That same hold, careful and sure. And this time, she didn't look away, and she didn't deflect, and she didn't find a practical task to redirect to. She put her hands over his, her broad, calloused hands over his broad, calloused hands. And she let herself be exactly where she was. They were married 9 days later, the Saturday of the harvest social, in the morning before the wagon was loaded. Reverend Hollis was a thin, cheerful man who performed the ceremony in the kitchen, with the biscuits still warm on the rack and the coffee going cold on the table, because nobody had remembered to drink it. Ruby wore her blue calico, not Nora's dress, her own, the one she'd made from the gray muslin in the weeks since she'd arrived, taken in and let out, and fitted to the body she actually had, not the body she was supposed to apologize for. Caleb stood across from her in his good shirt, with his jaw shaved clean, and when Reverend Hollis asked the question, his answer came without hesitation, and without performance, and without the slightest concern for the room. When Ruby answered, she looked at Caleb and nowhere else. Hollis said, "I'll call it done," and stepped back, and Caleb stepped forward, and they met in the middle, the way they'd been meeting in the middle since the day on the south fence line. Neither one waiting for the other to close the distance, both of them moving at the same time. The harvest social that afternoon was the largest Ruby had ever seen. 4 counties on the green outside the Bitterroot Church Hall, with tables running end to end and children underfoot, and the smell of every kind of food she knew and a few she didn't. She had a table at the east end, 7 jars of preserves, 4 crocks of butter, 2 loaves of good bread, and a pan of the apple cake that Caleb had tested twice in the week before and declared, both times, to be the best thing he'd eaten since the war. She sold out in 4 hours. Dorothy Haynes passed her table twice. The first time she walked past without slowing. The second time, she stopped and looked at the empty display, and then looked at Ruby, and there was a moment between them. Not friendly, not warm, but something that had moved one notch from where it used to be. "Apple cake," Dorothy said. "Sold out," Ruby said. "I'll have more at the October market." Dorothy pressed her lips together. Then she gave a single, tight nod and walked on. Ruby packed up her empty jars and folded her tablecloth and thought, "One notch is enough." At the end of the afternoon, as they loaded the wagon for the drive home, Caleb counted out the social's proceeds and added them to the remaining balance and stood back and looked at the numbers. $41. Clear, after the table fee and the supplies. He looked at her. She looked at the number. Then she looked up. "That's the barn," she said. "Most of it." "Lumber is going to be more." "I know." "We'll need another run before first frost." "I know that too." He folded the bills and put them in his coat. "We'll get there." She looked at the road that ran north out of Bitterroot toward the ranch, the same road she'd driven 3 weeks ago for the first time, watching the land the way she always watched things, looking for the places about to give. She'd found them. She'd fixed some of them. She'd found that some of them weren't flaws at all. They were just the natural shape of something real, something that had been built by people who worked hard and didn't waste and held on. She climbed up on the wagon seat. Caleb climbed up beside her and took the reins. The wagon rolled out of Bitterroot and north toward the ranch, and the late summer light came down long and gold across the wheat fields. And Ruby Calloway, Ruby Durst now, though it would take her a week to say it out loud without the strange weight of it, sat on the bench with her shoulder against his shoulder and watched the land open up ahead of them. She thought about the auction yard, the rope at her wrists, the auctioneer's voice dropping by degrees. 40 cents? Nobody bid. She thought about a man's steady boots on packed dirt, walking toward the platform without hurry, without needing the crowd's permission. She thought about a knife, a rope, a fence post, a clean basin on a washstand, a bolt on the inside of a door. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not looked at, not assessed, not priced. Seen. The whole of her. The broad hands and the sharp mind and the stubbornness and the 34 years of managing on her own and the specific, irreducible weight of being exactly who she was. She'd spent a long time waiting for that to be too much for someone, for the calculation to shift, for the moment when being her would finally, permanently, cost more than she was worth. It hadn't happened. She didn't think it was going to. "You all right?" Caleb asked, not looking away from the road. "Yes," she said. "Good kind of day?" She thought about Crane and Pickett and Dorothy Haynes's tight nod, and the empty jars, and the $41, and the flour on her hands this morning, and his hands on her face. "Good kind of day," she said. He nodded once, the gesture small and certain.